Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson. One thing done particularly well in the Star Wars universe is their ability to take seemingly unimportant characters and giving them a backstory. And now with the new movies coming out, we have a whole slew of new characters being introduced, Phasma among them. And they're not just simply a backdrop for the rest of the story. They've been coming out with these origin stories for these minor characters. The original Star Wars, one that comes to mind that was real famous, that had a really tiny role, but has seemed to get a lot of toys, specifically in Lego, would be like Boba Fett. You get just a tiny little glimpse of him and throughout the original series, and then in the first three films, they kind of explore more of his backstory and kind of a big deal as far as with the Clone Wars. Well, Phasma is obviously in the Force Awakens. She's featured, and obviously this is her origin story, kind of where she comes from, why she is the way she is. In the movie, she doesn't really have a whole lot of lines, doesn't really add that much to the plot. But we do see in the movie how she seems very rigid, kind of that unbending soldier for the First Order. And this book does a really good job of explaining why that is. And the character is really a product of her environment, as the book kind of points out. And one thing that this book does really well is I really like how it's kind of two stories told in parallel. This story really surrounds the character Vi, who is a rebel spy and is captured by the First Order. And one of Phasma's colleagues, I guess you could say, in the First Order takes Vi deep down into a Star Destroyer to interrogate, to find out dirt on Phasma to try to take Phasma down. So Vi spends most of the book tied to a chair and is interrogated by this guy in the Star Destroyer. And the whole time, Vi is trying to figure out how to escape, how to kind of draw out the process of the interrogation, try not to piss off the guy interviewing her, I guess you could say. So she draws out this long story about Phasma and kind of where she comes from. And there's this general that kind of mysteriously disappeared, and people think that Phasma killed him. But either way, that's what this guy's trying to find out, is dirt on Phasma to take her down so that he can take his place. The First Order is all full of ambitious people trying to climb higher and higher. And that's the basic outline of the story. But I really like that there's simple plots done very well, not overly complicated. And it kind of bounces between Phasma and Vi. So Vi's retelling of Phasma's story starts with her in a tiny little tribe on some dying planet. Real harsh conditions, which explains why she's kind of rigid. Her whole life up until this point has been to ensure the safety of her tribe. And also there isn't a lot of kids around. They have a hard time having kids, and so there's only like one for the whole tribe, and she's like the crown jewel of the tribe. So they're basically dying. Slowly but surely they're dying out. So right there, Phasma's already kind of a rigid character. And like I said, it's a harsh environment, so they don't really venture that far out. So they're really unaware of the surrounding tribes, abandoned cities, history of the planet is really lost to them. They know they had kind of a grand history. The technology is kind of around, and they come across bits and pieces of scrap, and so they know that they had a grander future, and they're slowly dying. They kind of know that. And so Phasma has always had this fascination of getting off planet. So she sees a ship kind of crash land, and she decides to go check it out. Along the way, she bumps into this general and a small collection of stormtroopers. And basically all she's trying to do is get the general from the escape pod to the ship so that they can contact the First Order so they can be picked up. And along the way, they have their problems, we'll say. Try not to give too much away. It was actually a pretty good story. But again, a lot of stuff happens, but the plot is very simple, but done very well. Phasma, you see how she goes from only doing what's in the best interest of her tribe to a little bit more selfish. Her warriors that follow her are kind of noticing these small little changes. You see where she gets her armor. Why is she different than all the rest of the stormtroopers? Why is she that stainless steel look? Which I think is kind of cool. Reminds me of those 50s robots. And since this book is a little bit long and the plot is a little bit simple, the author really kind of digs into like adding even a little bit of personality to the stormtroopers. We get to know them a little bit, which is kind of rare. Obviously, The Force Awakens, one of the characters is a stormtrooper, but then he defects and he's no longer a stormtrooper anymore. But you get kind of a better idea of how the stormtroopers are and kind of when they're not taking orders and oppressing people. Kind of get an idea of what goes through their heads. Little individuality going on there, which I liked. And along the way, there's little surprises, mentions of some guy and a Wookiee, obviously referring to Han Solo. Little hints that kind of tied in with the rest of the universe. Kind of main characters passing by each other. And also, I would recommend getting it on Audible. If you have an Audible account, I'd check it out. Otherwise, if you don't have an Audible account, I would definitely get one. The first book's free. Like all the other Star Wars books, they're not just simply a narration of it. The narrator acts out the different voices. So it sounds like it's like a play. It sounds like there's 10 different people in the room acting out all these different characters. But on top of that, they add background noises, ship sounds, wind for Phasma when she's around her tribe and outside. When a stormtrooper speaks, it's kind of muffled, kind of like the stormtroopers in the movie. When Phasma puts on her mask, she has the same kind of a sound, very strict sounding voice. And it really adds to the kind of the experience of it. I mean, there are other dramatizations on Audible, but the Star Wars ones, it's like every book they do, even going back to like Death Troopers, they all have that sound effects, blaster sounds, which makes it kind of almost sound like you're listening to a movie. Check it out, let me know, and I will talk to you next time.